Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and this is a supplemental episode here. Now for something completely different, or at least somewhat different. What I want to use these supplemental episodes for is to enlighten you on different things that might be relating to the Star Wars universe as a whole, to the Star Wars saga in publishing as a whole, things that don't really fit when talking about one single issue of a comic series or novel or whatever. In this case, we want to take a look at the many and varied uses of the name in official publishing, classic Star Wars. This is something that I think has a tendency to confuse people, and has in the past, I think, confused some viewers of this series who are less familiar with that particular product line, or those product lines. So I want to start out with where this title was first used in Star Wars comics. Now, classic Star Wars, at least for Dark Horse Comics, begins in publishing with the 20-issue series, that's this bad boy here, that reprints the Archie Goodwin and Al Williamson newspaper strips that were the same strips that were collected in the 1991 Russ Cochran set, albeit now newly colored, reorganized with the redundancies taken out. Now, this does not include Archie Goodwin's adaptation of Han Solo at Star's End, or Planet of Cadril, the latter of which he wrote as Russ Helm. This series was collected later into 3 trade paperbacks. In Deadly Pursuit includes issues 1 through 7. The Rebel Storm includes issues 8 through 14, with Luke doing his Aquaman impression there. And then Escape to Hoth, which is volume 3, includes issues 15 through the larger sized number 20, the end of that series. Now, the follow-up series to that is actually material that was originally printed before the Williamson and Goodwin newspaper strips. These are collected as Classic Star Wars: The Early Adventures, and it consists of 7 issues. Right, that's the first, going all the way to the end with the Boba Fett cover there on number 7, which reprint most of the Russ Manning era of the newspaper strips, excluding the Kashyyyk Depths, which has never been collected, and the Constancia Affair, which was later reprinted as the KB Toys Dark Horse Comics exclusive without the classic name up there at the top. Now, this 7-issue series, not counting Constancia Affair, has been collected as a trade paperback simply under the series name Classic Star Wars: The Early Adventures. Now, publishing-wise, there were 2 stories in between what we think of as Classic Star Wars: The Early Adventures and Classic Star Wars. Between Russ Manning and then his assistant stepping in at the end, Rick Hoberg, finishing up their run, or mainly his run, Russ Manning's run, we had Archie Goodwin come in for Han Solo at Star's End as an adaptation of the novel, and then under the name Russ Helm, Planet of Cadril. Planet of Cadril was never collected again, but Han Solo at Star's End's adaptation was, as again, Classic Star Wars. It is Classic Star Wars, Han Solo at Star's End, issues 1 through 3. It's a 3-issue miniseries that collects that novel adaptation by Archie Goodwin and Alfredo Alcala from the newspaper strips that was left out of that original Classic Star Wars series, which featured Goodwin, but not Alcala. That was Williamson doing the art for that series. This was also collected in a single trade paperback under the same name. Now, the Marvel comics from the 1970s and 1980s, they have also received extensive reprinting under the name Classic Star Wars. The first 6 issues of the Marvel series, you can kind of tell where I'm going with this, I'm sure, if you remember one of the earliest episodes of From the Star Wars Library. The first 6 issues of the Marvel series are an adaptation of A New Hope, which Marvel reprinted repeatedly, sometimes in parts, sometimes in whole, and then were reprinted by Dark Horse Comics as 2 issues. I almost said 3. 2 issues there, with issues 1, 2, and 3 being issue 1 for Dark Horse, and then 4, 5, and 6 being issue 2 for Dark Horse. Dark Horse also took those 2 issues that made up the 6 issues of the Marvel run and put them out as one single story called, guess what? Classic Star Wars: A New Hope, the name that the 2 collecting issues also carried. Then Marvel issues 39 through 44, which were an adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back, were also reprinted multiple times by Marvel until eventually being reprinted by Dark Horse Comics. Again, with the first 3 parts being in the first part, the first issue of their 2-issue adaptation through Dark Horse, which is just the reprinting of the Marvel one. 4 through 6 being in the second issue. That 2-issue series was then later compiled into one single volume, all of which were referred to as Classic Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. So, as you would expect, Classic Star Wars: Return of the Jedi is a reprinting of Marvel's oft-reprinted Return of the Jedi film adaptation miniseries that was a separate numbering from the regular Marvel run. This time it is a 4-issue adaptation, and they split it into halves again. So we had issues 1 and 2 in Classic Star Wars Return of the Jedi number 1, issues 3 and 4 in number 2. They were also again collected as a single volume as Classic Star Wars Return of the Jedi. Of course, then those individual editions, right, taking A New Hope 1 and 2, Empire Strikes Back 1 and 2, Return of the Jedi 1 and 2, all called Classic Star Wars, were all then compiled together into a boxed set called Classic Star Wars, or the Classic Star Wars Trilogy. But then later, they took the Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi comic adaptations that had been called Classic Star Wars, removed the Classic Star Wars name, and put them into another box set, this time with a new Dark Horse adaptation of A New Hope by Bruce Jones, updated for the special editions and whatnot, that was not considered Classic Star Wars in any form because it was not a reprint. So essentially that box set was one new original Dark Horse series plus 2 Classic Star Wars series without the label that were reprinting Marvel stuff. Confused yet? That latter box set, by the way, was referred to as the special edition collection of these. So we have the original classics and we have the special edition, just like we do with the versions of the film, which I guess is appropriate. Now, the mainstream Marvel series ran for what I usually refer to as 114 issues. It's 107 regular issues, plus that 4-issue Return of the Jedi miniseries, plus 3 annuals. So you lump that all together, it's 114 individual issues, not counting any material that appeared in the Marvel Pizzazz magazine, and not counting anything that was reprinted from the UK in places like the Marvel Illustrated Books Star Wars books. Now, the first attempt by Dark Horse Comics to do a reprint of something beyond film adaptations from the Marvel series was an oddball, and it's often forgotten. It's Classic Star Wars: The Vandalhelm Mission by Archie Goodwin and Al Williamson, the same team who did the newspaper strips of the era that became the original Classic Star Wars from Dark Horse, that 20-issue series. But this is just a reprinting and recoloring of Marvel issue number 98, which is entitled not The Vandalhelm Mission, but Supply and Demand. Dark Horse's second attempt to reprint the Marvel stuff outside of the film adaptations is one that, frankly, I'm going to have to cheat off some stats that I pulled out on my screen here because it's kind of a haphazard process that they went through. What they created was a 6-issue prestige format series that we know of as Classic Star Wars: A Long Time Ago. That series was all black and white, pre-recolorizing, as would happen in a later trade paperback series and the omnibus series. Now, what you got in this set is sort of a haphazard group of issues, as I mentioned here. There are issues 28, 38, 49, 50, 51, 52, 58, 59, 60, 66, 68, 69, 79, 80, 81, 83, 86, 91, 103, and all 3 annuals, though not even remotely in that order. For the record, that's all 3 annuals and 19 regular issues from the series, which is just shy of 20% of the full 114 Marvel issues. Moreover, it's only 3 issues from between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. Then 5 issues set after Return of the Jedi, and the other 14 issues are all set between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. The Marvel series was later reprinted without the Return of the Jedi miniseries. It was already out there as part of those box sets and such, so just the regular series and the annuals, 110 issues here, and a 7-volume trade paperback series, which was also called Classic Star Wars: A Long Time Ago. Same name as that prestige format series, only this time full size and in color, and it's a 7-volume set with everything but the Return of the Jedi miniseries. In that case, issues 1 to 20 were in the first volume entitled Doom World, followed by 21 to 38 and the first annual in volume 2, Dark Encounters. Volume 3, Resurrection of Evil, had issues 39 to 53, issues 54 to 67, and the second annual were in Volume 4, Screams in the Void. Issues 68 to 81 and the third annual were in Volume 5, Fool's Bounty. Issues 82 to 95 were in Volume 6, Wookiee World, and then issues 96 to 107 were in Volume 7, Far, Far Away. The entire series, minus Return of the Jedi. It was the first attempt at giving us the entire series. They could just rationalize the fact that Return of the Jedi was reprinted somewhere else. So finally we got that for modern audiences with better paper, better colors. But that was not the last time we'd see those. We would eventually wind up seeing that entire run reprinted again. And you know where I'm going with this because you've seen these over and over again as we talk about the Marvel series here on the show. As Star Wars Omnibus a long time ago, volumes 1 through 5. Though, in this particular case, yeah, these are not called Classic Star Wars. They're just called Star Wars Omnibus, but again, that same subtitle, a long time ago. Now, often forgotten among the classic Star Wars materials, though maybe not as much as the Vandalhelm mission, is a 2-issue series called Classic Star Wars Devil Worlds. Devil Worlds is an interesting one because it reprints material that was originally created for the Marvel UK Star Wars series that had not been reprinted in the United States. Some of the original Marvel UK stuff had been, but not this. The first issue here includes the stories Dark Lord's Conscience from The Empire Strikes Back Monthly number 155, Dark Knight's Devilry from The Empire Strikes Back Monthly number 153, Flight of the Falcon in The Empire Strikes Back Monthly 157, and Blind Fury from the renamed Star Wars Monthly number 159. The second Devil Worlds issue featured the stories Rust Never Sleeps from The Empire Strikes Back Monthly number 156, The Pandora Effect from The Empire Strikes Back Monthly number 151, and the bizarre time-bending tale Telatany Throws a Shape from The Empire Strikes Back Monthly number 154. Now these 2 issues were never reprinted as a trade paperback, but they will be appearing in Star Wars Omnibus Wild Space Volume 1 in 2013. They don't include all the original tales from the Marvel UK series, as will be covered in another of these supplemental episodes when we look at the Marvel UK stuff, but the rest will be in the Wild Space Omnibus, so take heart in that. And yes, for those who are curious, I will be covering those UK-only stories, or the ones that were originally released in the UK back in the 80s. They will be covered, but I'm waiting until the end of the coverage of the broader American Marvel run before we check those out. So expect to see those after we get to the end of the Marvel series with All Together Now, issue 107. Given that those weren't produced for American audiences and I'm going in American publishing order, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to deal with them before that, but I will go through and put them in at the end of the regular Marvel series. For those who are worried, but what about the internal chronology? If you've ever seen the internal chronology of the Marvel UK stuff, it is scrambled like mad. So I really don't feel a sense of obligation to go back and slot them in where they were originally published, because Marvel UK didn't feel that way about the US stuff. Now I know you're thinking, whew, that's it, we must be done by now. But there's one other situation that does bear noting here. The Classic Star Wars label was also applied by Del Rey to its Star Wars novels from the 1970s and 1980s when they were reprinted in the 1990s. The Han Solo adventures, right? Han Solo at Star's End, Han Solo's Revenge, and Han Solo and the Lost Legacy saw print without the Classic Star Wars name in omnibus form in 1992. Then, this was reprinted with the Classic Star Wars label when the omnibus was reprinted again in 1994. Then the individual novels were reprinted with the Classic Star Wars name on their cover in 1997. The other trilogy from that time that's not a film adaptation is the Lando Calrissian Adventures. The Lando Adventures, as I often call them, saw re-release as an omnibus also in 1994 with that Classic Star Wars label. That's what you would see if you saw this 1992 omnibus reprinted for 1994. It's very similar, but it does have that different top to it. See here, no Classic Star Wars, and there's Classic Star Wars. Just basically that box around the logo is all that you would see. Now, it saw release as an omnibus in 1994 under the Classic Star Wars name, that is the Lando Calrissian Adventures, but there were no new individual releases of the Lando books, nor was there a 1992 release to coincide with that first omnibus printing of the Han Solo book. So if you're finding Lando Calrissian as a omnibus with that black cover, it's going to have the Classic Star Wars logo on it. Interestingly enough, though, both of those trilogies were later reprinted again in omnibus form after Del Rey reclaimed the Star Wars license, and when that happened, neither of those, neither the Han Solo Adventures in 2002 nor the Lando Calrissian Adventures in 2005, bore the name Classic Star Wars. As soon as they got the label back, they said, screw it, tossed out Classic Star Wars, and just put it in with the regular mainstream Star Wars novel line. The other original Star Wars novel of Del Rey's first round with the franchise was Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which was also reprinted under the Classic Star Wars logo in 1994. It's basically this cover again, except above Splinter of the Mind's Eye, it was another of those Star Wars logo with Classic on top of it. Of course, the film novelizations for the Classic trilogy were also re-released by Del Rey under the Classic Star Wars title. You may recall this 1987 The Star Wars Trilogy Omnibus that I've showed you before that includes the signature in here of Alan Dean Foster. Well, this omnibus was reprinted as Classic Star Wars, The Star Wars Trilogy in 1989. So it bore the Classic Star Wars name. Then they took the individual novels for A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, put them out as Classic Star Wars in 1994. Now, interestingly, between these two Classic Star Wars runs of the novels, there was a 1993 version of the omnibus that didn't bear the Classic title to it. And after that whole bearing the Classic name in 1994 issue when they were individual novels, the novels were reprinted again as individual hardback novels in 1995 when they were meant to promote the THX re-release of the series on VHS. This is the widescreen set here, but you're going to remember this because you've seen these in hardback, I'm sure, sitting on store shelves, even in some places today, with those VHS covers as the covers of the books. So you had those hardbacks in 1995. No label saying Classic Star Wars. Then the novels are reprinted again as a new omnibus in 1997 to take advantage of the special editions in theaters. Again, no Classic Star Wars logo on them, and neither of those releases, as I said, 95 or 97, had that logo, nor has any other subsequent reprinting of those novelizations since Del Rey reacquired the Star Wars publishing license in the lead up to the new millennium. So that about does it for Classic Star Wars, but bear in mind, those are all not to be confused with animated classics on home video for droids and Ewoks. These, fortunately, are not books or comics, so we can avoid these Nelvana animated series entirely for the moment. Thank you, Maker! I hope this has been somewhat illustrative for those who have been having trouble with that Classic Star Wars name. I thank you for watching, and as always, may the Force be with the readers.